Thank you very much. Well, I will be presenting on learning losses during COVID-19 pandemic in Ethiopia, which is a cohort comparison. And I'm presenting this on behalf of my team, professors from Addis Ababa University, Tasso and Belai, myself, and from University of Cambridge, Professor Masala, Pauline, and Ricardo are team members of this research. And this research is supported by RISE Ethiopia, maybe you know about RISE Ethiopia, which is supported by the FID, FCDO, and this research is also supported by Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation. So we would like to thank both supporters. Before I go to the next slide, yeah.
Donc, en fait, le titre de sa présentation, c'est le déficit en apprentissage pendant donc, la pandémie de Covid en Éthiopie. Et donc, ce sera une comparaison de deux cohortes. Donc, vous avez les noms des personnes qui ont contribué en fait, à l'étude ici. Et je crois que ça a été financé par le Bill Gates Foundation.
Bill Gates.
And who
FCDO.
FCDO.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. D'accord.
Thank you very much. So as an introduction, everybody knows schools were closed all over the world, including Ethiopia, and almost 26 million students or learners were out of school for about 8 months in Ethiopia. But when schools were reopened, the Ministry of Education had to arrange a catch-up class for 45 days. So learning during school closure was minimal. In fact, the Ministry of Education had a televised support to students and education radio support to students, but still the implementation had some problems. School closures and barriers to accessing available remote learning meant potential learning losses because many people didn't get adequate support during school closure. The existing studies on learning lost due to school closure in Ethiopia are mainly based on historical data projection and phone surveys that we did. However, we didn't have the concrete data, how much is lost kind of data. So this study is focusing on how much is lost during because of the COVID. So the objective, yes. Yes.
Donc, en introduction, c'est tout simplement pour faire le point sur la situation donc, de COVID, de la fermeture des écoles pendant la pandémie. Donc, en Éthiopie, il y a 26 millions d'apprenants qui ont été touchés par la fermeture des écoles. Ensuite, la chose la plus importante, c'est qu'ils espèrent que la fermeture des écoles n'a pas eu un impact, a eu un impact minimal par rapport à l'apprentissage. Et ensuite, il y a une chose qui est peut-être importante. Ils disent ceci montre en fait que concrètement, comment l'apprentissage, le niveau d'apprentissage qui a été affecté par la fermeture donc, des écoles, comparé avec la situation avant la COVID.
Yeah, so the objective of this study is to compare numeracy skills of pupils before COVID and after school reopening. This is one objective. The other is to compare progress or gain in numeracy scores of pupils over the course of the 2 academic years in grades 1 and 4. And the third objective is to estimate the of learning loss attributable to the pandemic by calculating the difference in numeracy levels and progress between the 2 cohorts.
Donc, je vais essayer de résumer en fait, ce qu'il vient de dire, c'est que l'approche méthodologique qui a été utilisée, elle était quantitative. Donc, ils ont, pour la collecte des données, ça portait sur 138 écoles, donc sur 6 régions de l'Éthiopie.
After COVID. So I will focus only on the total because Addis Ababa, Amhara, Benshangul, Somali, Oromia, South Somali, all together they have the total number of respondents. Just focus on the total. This is in 2018, pre-COVID cohort, grade 1 students, we assessed grade 1 students at the beginning of the academic year. These are 3,619. And then by the end of the year, we followed them up at the end of the year, and we found 2,670, which is 949 less, which is an attrition. And the attrition rate is 26%, which is similar to the national magnitude for attrition in grade 1. And in post-school closure, I mean school opening, grade 1 students, we collected data from 3,838, and we followed them up towards the end of the academic year, and we got 3,560, and the attrition was 274, which is 7.14%, which is much lesser than the previous cohort. So in grade 4, we also did the same. In 2018-19, we collected data from 3,622, and we followed them up towards the end of the academic year, and we found 2,918, which is 19% attrition. But in the post-school closure cohort in 2020-21, we collected data from 3,787, and we followed this people's grade 4 students towards the end of the academic year, and we found 3,574, which is less by 213, which is 6% again.
Donc, en ce qui concerne l'échantillonnage, donc ils ont comparé d'abord 2 niveaux. Le niveau 1, donc, qui est à peu près l'équivalent du CI ou CP dans le système francophone, et ensuite grade 4, c'est l'équivalent d'à peu près du CE2. Donc, ils ont, au point de vue total, vous voyez donc les 6 régions qui sont concernées, donc pendant la période 2018-2019, pour le CP, il y avait 3619. Il y a eu ensuite, maintenant, à la fin, donc end grade, c'est à la fin donc, de l'année, il y a à peu près 949. Donc, ce qui fait qu'il y a plutôt 2670. Donc, il y a eu une déperdition de 949 qui est l'équivalent de 26,2%. Donc, ça, c'est la situation du CP. Et ensuite, pour le CE2, vous avez à peu près les chiffres sont là, donc vous pouvez voir. C'est bon?
Yeah, in terms of the analysis, it's a quantitative analysis that we employed, and we used both descriptive statistics and regression. OLS value-added model has been used, and in the descriptive statistics, we will see by graphs, using graphs to show differences in baseline test scores between the 2 cohorts and learning gain over the academic year. So we will see this in the model, and in the inferential statistics, we have the regression ordinary least square value added learning model, inline scores conditional on baseline scores. So we have this regression equation where the outcome score is the test score of pupils in school S at the end of the school year, where COVID refers to the pandemic shock, which is designated as 0 for the pre-COVID cohort and 1 for the post-COVID cohort. So we also included school fixed effects in the model, and we also included the covariates.
Donc, en bref, ils ont utilisé une approche quantitative et comme vous pouvez voir, le modèle qui a été utilisé et la formule qui a été utilisée. Donc, pour ceux qui connaissent très bien les formules, voilà, c'est ça.
Great. So what are the results? So I will start with the descriptive statistics. What did we get after testing or after administering the tests, numeracy test scores for grade 1 and for grade 4. In fact, I should tell you that for grade 1 students, they were tested on test items on both at the beginning and end of the test, the academic year. So the test was identical. So they repeated the same test at the end of the academic year for grade 1. But for grade 4, we had test questions at the beginning of the test, and we added few more questions at the end of, which will be used for the end-line assessment or at the end of the academic year. And we didn't use the raw score as is, but we transformed the raw score into standard scores with a mean of 500 and standard deviation of 100. So this is just something that I didn't put in the slide before the results.
En ce qui concerne donc les résultats, c'est qu'il y a eu des tests qui ont été administrés donc aux élèves du CP. Et en fait, c'est le même test qui a été utilisé au début et à la fin. Ensuite, pour le CE2, il y a eu un test qui a été administré. Puis ensuite, ils ont en fait plutôt ajouté quelques questions dans le test final qui a été administré. Et là, vous allez voir la différence donc, au niveau de la moyenne statistique et aussi de, je crois que c'est l'écart type qu'on dit, standard deviation. C'est l'écart type, ouais, plus bon que je me souviens encore. Et voilà, les écarts types. Voilà. Donc, pour ceux qui connaissent bien le... Thank you.
Yeah, so the result for grade 1, at the beginning of pre-COVID assessment, grade 1, they scored 77. But in the post school reopening time, at the beginning, they scored 62. So the difference is 15 percentage points loss. This is just to start the academic year. Now, when they progress over the year, over 9 months period of education, at the end of the 9th month, they were also tested again. Now, for the pre-COVID cohort, from 77, it increased to 88. While for the post-COVID, from 62, it increased to 69. So the comparison here is from 88, if you subtract 69, there is a difference of 19 percentage points. So those grade 1 students who started with low score after the COVID, after schools were reopened, they gained less than what the other cohort or those before COVID gained. So the gain is also indicated here, but the loss shows that there is 19 percentage points loss because of COVID for grade 1.
Donc, en ce qui concerne les résultats, c'est que donc pendant le test qui a été administré au tout début, disons avant la COVID, c'est les résultats que vous voyez, c'est 77 points et 62, donc il y a eu déjà une perte de 15%, de 15 points de pourcentage. Et ensuite, quand ils ont été retestés plus tard à la fin donc, de 9 mois de l'année scolaire, on a remarqué que il y a eu un gain, en fait, pour la cohorte qui a été testée après la COVID de 88. Et donc, il y a eu une perte de 19 points de pourcentage donc de perte ou de déficit d'apprentissage.
All right. There is a similar pattern for grade 4 as well. If you look at the two cohorts, the blue color is the pre-COVID one, and the orange or red color is the post-COVID or post-school reopening. So at the beginning, they had differences. The difference is about 10 points. And after going through the academic year, towards the end of the academic year, what they registered or gained is different as well, where there will be, there is a loss of 22 points.
D'accord. Par rapport donc au CE2, donc il y a les deux couleurs, la couleur bleue ou verte, je n'arrive pas à déterminer la couleur exactement, c'est avant Covid, et la couleur rouge, c'est après la Covid. Donc déjà dès le départ, il y a eu déjà une petite différence donc, au niveau de la perte des points. Donc vous voyez, c'est 500, 490, donc il y a eu une perte de 10. Et ensuite, on remarque qu'après, donc, après, plus pendant la COVID, il y a eu une perte de 22 points.
Yeah. Okay, the results have been disaggregated by several factors. So gender is one, rural, urban is another, region, and wealth index. They have been captured in the data collection, and comparisons were also made based on this background characteristics. So the first in this graph, the graph shows downward. Downward means losses. So what percentage were lost is being compared for grade 1 and grade 4. So grade 1, you can follow with the blue bars, and the orange bars are grade 4 students. So for all students, this is what we've already seen in the previous graph. Whereas grade 1 students lost 15 points, grade 4 lost 10 points at the beginning of the school year. So if you look for boys and girls, boys had to lose more than girls. However, it doesn't mean that boys performed less than girls. It just means boys were falling from the top and they remained still at the top. So they lost about 36 points because they had higher score at the beginning. During school closure, boys were highly affected, but still they were not less than or less performing than female students. Females were also affected by this, but the drop was very high for boys, very high for urban schools like Addis Ababa, but the score is still remaining on the top because they were high scoring. Yes.
Alors, les résultats ont été donc désagrégés par, comme vous voyez, il y a le genre, la localité, la région. Et si vous voyez le sens donc, des barres, ça va plutôt vers le bas. Donc, en fait, il y a eu pour, là, l'exemple qu'il a donné, c'est que quand on regarde très bien, quand on fait la comparaison pour les filles et les garçons, donc on remarque que, évidemment, le graphe ici montre que c'est les garçons qui ont perdu en fait beaucoup, mais en réalité c'est comme ça parce que tout simplement ils sont tombés de très haut. Donc là, ça ne dit pas que les garçons en fait ont plus perdu que les filles. Donc il y a d'autres aussi interprétations qu'on peut faire, mais I will try to summarize here because otherwise it's going to be long. I don't want to repeat it.
It's okay.
I'm trying to do my best. I hope I'm conveying the
Yeah. Okay. In terms of gains, so it's not only losing, there is also gain over the academic year. Starting from October through May, they are learning and they should gain some kind of learning. So we summarized the learning and we compared the gains within 1 year for the two cohorts. So the gains were higher for those in the pre-COVID period than for those who were in the post-COVID period. So both of them gained, but the gain was higher before COVID than after COVID. That's the whole idea of this graph, but we can talk a little bit if need be.
Donc, en fait, ici, c'est donc il y a eu des gains malgré la COVID. Donc, en fait, ils ont pour les deux niveaux qu'on a ici, CP et puis CE2, il y a eu quand même des gains, mais on remarque en fait que dans le cas du, disons que le gain a été beaucoup plus important pour les cohortes au CP.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'm jumping, describing the graphs, but if there is any question, I will elaborate later. So in terms of the inferential statistics here, we use the OLS to estimate the magnitude of the loss. And we have models here. And the first model is on pooled ordinary least square. And the loss that is shown here is minus 18.69, which is, if I round it, it's about 19% loss is registered, which is significant. Now, when we make this OLS conditional to baseline scores, still it's lower, but still significant. About 14.4% loss is registered. Again, when we consider school effects, school fixed effects conditional to baseline, which means there could be variations among schools. And when we control those variations, still there is a learning loss, which is about 13.47% for grade 1. And all these significant, all these are significant after controlling the household characteristics and people characteristics, including gender, age, caregivers, literacy, wealth, and rural-urban variations. After controlling this, we still find statistically significant result of this magnitude of losses.
Okay. Donc, quand ils ont en fait passé les résultats par le modèle, donc par la formule, en fait, ils ont trouvé que, bon, ils ont compté, vous avez certaines variables, donc ils ont pris en compte certaines conditions, et puis ils ont remarqué qu'en fait, il y a eu une perte d'à peu près 19%, donc qui est statistiquement significative. Et ensuite, ils ont mis, en prenant en compte certains facteurs, ben, on s'est retrouvé surtout le school fixed effects, donc ce sont des effets qui sont liés à l'école. Donc, il y a à peu près 13,47% de perte ou de déficit.
Yeah, similar results have been registered for grade 4 students as well. So it's significant, and it's about similar result here. It's about 19% less due to COVID closure. And when the pooled OLS is conditional to the baseline, it's about 13% less. And when school effects, fixed effects conditional to baseline scores were considered, it's about 14.64%. Again, this is significant after controlling all those variables. So it's similar.
Donc, c'est pratiquement la même chose aussi pour le CE2. En fait, c'est les mêmes résultats.
Yeah, let me conclude because we have time pressure. In fact, this is not only conclusion, it's about recommendation as well. So we estimate a numeracy loss equivalent to at least 1/3 of the academic year in both grade 1 and 4. So we have lost that magnitude. Equity aspect of the current educational reform in Ethiopia continues to be central in supporting learning for post-COVID cohorts. To make up and boost learning, we suggest the following. Number one, scheduling after-school programs for make-up classes. Maybe one possibility is adding learning time, maybe in the evening or in the weekends, and adding about 100 more minutes each day for learning. So otherwise they cannot make it up. And in the literature, it says the effect of the learning loss is not only for that grade level. This can be carried over to the rest of their lives. So there should be a make-up of the lost learning. Otherwise, the impact will continue to stay. That's why we are suggesting more minutes per day as an additional. And additional learning strategies could be one-on-one tutorial support, creating individualized learning plans, and providing psychosocial counseling special support, because it's not only the numeracy as such, there are other components of learning that need to be addressed to make them learn better.
Donc, en ce qui concerne donc la conclusion, mais c'est aussi des recommandations. Ce qui a été estimé, c'est qu'il y a eu une perte d'apprentissage en numérique d'à peu près un tiers pour les deux niveaux. Et ensuite, donc, pour essayer de rattraper cette perte-là, et il dit que c'est nécessaire en fait de le faire, parce que si ce n'est pas fait, ce qui va se passer, c'est que les élèves vont continuer avec ce déficit tout au long de leur scolarité. Donc, il est nécessaire en fait d'intervenir le plus rapidement possible. Et donc, il y a quelques stratégies qui ont été proposées ici, comme des cours de rattrapage ou bien donc il faut augmenter donc le temps d'apprentissage, peut-être une soirée ou bien pendant un week-end, et puis ensuite ajouter 5 minutes en plus chaque jour pour l'apprentissage. Donc, et d'autres stratégies, c'est d'avoir maintenant un soutien scolaire qui est donc donné aux enfants, et leur aussi créer des plans d'apprentissage individuels. Et ensuite aussi l'accompagnement psychosocial et de conseils, et puis bon, des soutiens aussi spéciaux, si nécessaire.
Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Belay, for giving us that glimpse of learning loss in Ethiopia by doing this cohort comparison and analysis. I think the message is clear. There's loss because of COVID. For both grades 1 and 4. And the findings confirm that this loss is real and significant. And also thank you for the recommendations for policy. So we will now move to the second presentation, and I urge the presenter and our temporary interpreter to be quick because we don't really have much time. So if you can just do this in 10 minutes, we will really appreciate it.
My name is Mengesha Ali. I'm a PhD student in University of Yaoundé 2 in Cameroon. I say thank you to organization committee to accept our purpose for this symposium. Please, I'm doing our presentation in French language, please. En fait, le cycle de nos communications intitulé Usage e-learning en période de COVID-19 dans les pays en développement, une analyse de la participation des femmes au Cameroun. Ici, le plan est déroulé en 5 points. Nous aurons en contexte une revue de la littérature, une méthodologie, des résultats, des recommandations de politique économique.
It's the outline, I think it's very clear to.
Merci. L'avènement du COVID-19 est une situation inédite à l'échelle planétaire. Cela a été démontré par l'Organisation mondiale de la santé. Et la persistance de cette pandémie dans le monde a entraîné davantage le système éducatif a changé de paradigme. Dans les méthodes d'enseignement pour des résultats de plus en plus satisfaisants malgré la crise sanitaire.
For the English-speaking people, I think are you able to follow a little bit? Okay, you're good. All right, just let me know.
Bon,
it was just basically here giving the background, the context of COVID in general, how disruptive it was, and it's a unique situation. And so he's just basically giving the background.
Yeah.
That's good.
I'm continuing to French, please. I prepared the presentation in French.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
yeah. Sorry, yeah, that's going to be difficult for you.
Yes, please. Bon, la majorité des enseignements, hier encore en présentiel, se déroulent davantage aujourd'hui en distanciel, sur les plateformes numériques, sous l'appellation du e-learning.
Well, he was just basically contrasting the situation where we used to have in-person or face-to-face learning. Now we have, moved to distance learning.
Cependant, atteindre l'égalité homme-femme dans l'éducation, qui est l'un des indicateurs cruciaux qui affectent le développement durable, est essentiel, notamment dans la manière dont elle développe le capital humain et offre aux individus des chances égales sur le marché.
So he's saying that to achieve parity between female and males, or women and men, it's not very easy. And when you add to this all the factors such as having the two types of the two approaches to learning, it's again more complex.
Thank you. Cependant, donc, les inégalités en matière d'éducation creusent les inégalités économiques, ce qui dans l'avenir entrave le bien-être économique. Tout simplement dit, plus il y a des inégalités en matière d'éducation, plus la crise économique peut survenir.
In a situation of an economic crisis, trying to achieve equality, or that she's saying that basically inequality is going to be very difficult to overcome.
Les études en présence du COVID-19 montrent une persistance ou alors une augmentation des inégalités en matière d'éducation dans le monde.
Basically, COVID has increased inequality in the world, and it's gender inequality.
La littérature en a même mis en exergue plus spécifiquement les inégalités qui se creusent davantage dans l'usage du e-learning entre les hommes et les femmes, et plus considérablement encore entre les familles riches et les familles pauvres.
So basically, the literature review actually reveals a widening gap, between male and females, and also between rich families and poor families.
Cette étude a donc pour but d'encourager davantage les écoles primaires, secondaires et universitaires à veiller systématiquement aussi bien pour une participation active des femmes dans les enseignements en ligne que pour une participation active des hommes dans une logique d'égalité de chances pour toutes et pour tous dans la réussite scolaire.
So the objective of this particular study is really to encourage rather teachers or schools to pay more attention to the participation of girls in distance learning, more so than men.
Ainsi, l'objectif de ce travail est d'analyser la participation des femmes dans l'usage e-learning en période de COVID-19 au Cameroun. Plus spécifiquement, il s'agit de montrer que le e-learning, la participation du e-learning en période de COVID-19 a une influence positive sur l'obtention des diplômes d'études primaires, secondaires et universitaires, d'une part, et de montrer que l'usage du e-learning par les femmes en période de COVID-19 a une influence positive sur le système d'enseignement francophone, anglophone et bilingue que le Cameroun possède aujourd'hui, les 3 systèmes, anglophone, francophone, bilingue. Oui.
What he's saying that the use of e-learning during COVID has actually shown that there are gains actually with regard to to learning for both, I think it's for post-secondary and tertiary studies, and also for the different systems, the different parties.
3 different systems.
Okay,
Anglophone,
anglophone, voilà, the system
francophone,
francophone,
and
anglophone au Cameroun, because Cameroon has that dual system.
Yes. La méthodologie mise en œuvre dans cette étude utilise donc des données d'enquête sur la pratique des nouveaux médias numériques réalisés au Cameroun en 2021 par le Centre d'études de recherche en économie et gestion avec l'appui technique de l'Institut national de la statistique.
So the methodological approach that he used, it's a survey on the use of the practice of using the new media. Here talking about digital media that was, I think, that took place in Cameroon in 2021 by the CEREG.
Bon, nous notons également que l'étude a été beaucoup plus menée dans la capitale camerounaise et dans la principale ville économique qui est Douala, parce que l'étude avait considéré que là, le taux d'accès Internet était un peu plus élevé par rapport aux autres villes périphériques et dans les autres régions.
Okay, so the study actually took place in Douala.
Yes, in Yaoundé, capital.
And Yaoundé, the capital.
Yes.
Because they're the main economic centers of the country.
Les résultats des estimations sont donc effectués sur la base d'un modèle de régression logique binaire.
So it was a quantitative method that was used. I didn't see it, but the name of the, okay.
Yes.
It's okay.
Thank you. Let's discuss result, please.
Okay.
Lorsque nous voyons les résultats au tableau, sur le premier graphique, nous voyons que la participation du e-learning dans cette zone enquêtée n'était que de 32,6%. C'est la partie qui est en rouge dans la population enquêtée. Et nous constatons que cette population n'atteint même pas 50%.
Donc, en ce qui concerne donc, les résultats, c'est qu'avant la COVID, sorry, I'm speaking back to French.
Going.
Yeah, I'm supposed to speak in English. Let's see what you have to say.
Okay.
So you can see I'm not a professional interpreter. So basically what he's saying that prior to the advent of COVID, actually the use of e-learning was represented only 32.6%. This is at in the pie there, it's the red part.
Maintenant, lorsqu'on prend dans le deuxième graphique, c'est-à-dire l'usage du e-learning, nous constatons que sur les femmes qui ont été enquêtées, il n'y en avait que 33,3%, cela n'atteint même pas 50%, qui faisaient usage du e-learning, contre 68,7% d'hommes qui faisaient usage du e-learning. Donc, c'est là qu'on a eu à noter une première inégalité entre les hommes et les femmes.
Okay, so the second pie here just shows that actually of all the people surveyed, only 33% of women were using e-learning, compared to 68.7% for men.
Maintenant, dans l'étude montre donc que ce faible taux de l'usage du e-learning chez les femmes est dû à la pauvreté de manière globale.
Okay, so the fact that the women were not using e-learning is basically due to poverty.
Car d'après les résultats de l'enquête, 26,5% des femmes enquêtées vivent à moins d'$1 par jour.
Okay, so basically the survey revealed that actually 26.5% of women were actually earning less than $1 per day.
Contre 13,1% qui vivent très confortablement.
Against 13% that really lived comfortably.
Et à ce niveau, nous observons également les inégalités entre les femmes, c'est-à-dire entre les femmes riches et les femmes pauvres.
So there's another layer of inequality here between rich and poor women.
Et ce qui aura donc pour conséquence dans l'avenir les abandons scolaires auprès des familles pauvres.
Yeah. So, as a consequence, there will be more dropping out, and also
Et par conséquent, les inégalités
inequalities.
éducatives.
Yeah, more education inequalities.
Si nous revenons donc au niveau des résultats économétriques, les résultats économétriques montrent l'existence d'une relation positive de l'usage du e-learning sur les systèmes éducatifs francophones et sur le système éducatif anglophone, ce qui montre quand même qu'il y a une certaine acceptation de la technologie dans ces deux systèmes éducatifs.
Using econometrics analysis, it shows that there is a positive correlation between e-learning in the francophone system, I think it's and the anglophone system. So in terms of the way people accept technology.
Ainsi, il existe une relation positive entre l'usage du e-learning et l'obtention du diplôme universitaire de la femme.
Mm-hmm. There's also a correlation between the acceptance of e-learning and also obtaining basically
Mais alors, malgré que cet effet soit positif, nous avons donc constaté que ces résultats étaient encore assez faibles.
Mm-hmm. In spite of this, for after analysis, they say this is still actually very weak, it's just basically not enough.
Mais alors, contrairement à ce qui était attendu, nous constatons qu'il n'y a même pas d'impact de l'usage du e-learning sur la réussite primaire et secondaire de la femme.
Mm-hmm. After further analysis, they have realized that actually there is no positive impact for women in primary and secondary education.
En termes de recommandations de politique économique, nous recommandons donc au pouvoir public d'améliorer davantage l'égalité dans le secteur éducatif entre les femmes et les hommes et entre les familles riches et les familles pauvres, en prenant des politiques d'éducation inclusive, même dans l'usage du e-learning, pour une réussite scolaire et un avenir meilleur pour toutes et pour tous.
Okay, so the main recommendation that they're making is really asking government to improve equality in the education sector between women and men and between the rich and the poor.
Thank you so much, please.
Thank you, Charlie, for that very passionate presentation, for bringing in the angle of women participation in e-learning, for reminding us that we have a huge challenge in terms of overcoming inequality, and also for bringing in the angle of socioeconomic status in terms of access to e-learning, and of course, re-emphasizing that achieving gender equality in education is very essential. So thank you for that presentation. Our second last presentation is going to be virtual, and I do hope that Virginia, you can take at most, sorry, I have to be very strict now, at most 5 to 7 minutes, and then Hamidou will summarize the presentation. You don't have to go slide by slide, you can just go through your presentation, and then Hamid will just translate the summary. So Virginia, are you able to hear us?
Very well, I can hear you quite clearly. I hope you can hear me as well.
Loud and clear. Over to you. Okay. Your 5 minutes begin now.
5 for 5, 5 for 10. All right, thank you so much for the opportunity and to present this. If we could go to the first slide. So I'll be presenting insights from an implementation of the implementation process of a project we've had looking into foundational literacy and numeracy, and through a process of contextualizing the teaching at the right level methodology for the Kenyan context, and specifically working in 3 regions in Kenya. So in the interest of time, I think I'll skip the 2 slides about the Africa, but largely it was just to demonstrate where this fits, where this piece of work sits within the organization under one of the core pillars of ensuring that children achieve or attain the competencies they need for learning. So moving on to slide 32, that's how I wish to begin my presentation. The accelerated learning program, as we know it, is a response to evidence around the status of foundational learning in Kenya, where consistently there have been many children who've been attending school. And this is, we know is not a new narrative, but failed to learn. And in that response, then we started off on a journey of contextualizing the teaching at the right level approach that is now widely known in very many countries. So the steps we applied, of course, were 4 distinct steps. One of them being assessment, applying the teaching applying the WESO assessments to determine or establish where the children are at. And then out of that, proceeding or rather working on goal setting as a stage, as a step to ensuring that teachers or the implementers have a better understanding of what children can do, what they cannot do. And that graduates them to a 3rd step of targeting instruction, which is around organizing learning experiences that are tailored to respond to the learning needs of the children. If the presenter could take us to slide number 32, please. So those were the 4 core pieces, the assessment grouping, and the grouping here is level-wise. And just to mention also that this process was run by teachers who were retooled on targeted instruction, taking them through the entire process, right from assessment, immersing them into grouping, goal setting, and planning for instruction that is level-based, and eventually facilitating the sessions with the children. So in this discussion, then, therefore, we'll choose to also demonstrate how the model was delivered. So we had the intervention would run for about 30 to 50 days in what we would call a camp cycle in the next slide. And just to demonstrate how that would happen is we had 10-day periods of intervention, 1 hour per day for literacy and another hour per day for numeracy, and assessments happening every 10th day. And that information being looked back to inform teachers on whether children are making progress, what level of progress are they achieving, and also to inform subsequent grouping in follow-up camps. So this was done between the period 2018 and 2022. But for the sake of this presentation, we'll just focus. We've just selected some cohorts because the interest is to demonstrate what then have we found to work. But for the focusing more on the insights that we have acquired over time, which is where I'll choose to spend a lot of time, and it is in the last 2 slides. So if we could move to the next one. Here we had a number of things, the process mechanisms through which this intervention was delivered. We had retooling of teachers, specifically exposing them to the core elements of the intervention as previously highlighted, the 4 pieces, the assessment, grouping, goal setting, and targeted instruction. But most importantly, also immersing them to experience what it means to visualize sessions from the perspective of a child. Then, of course, sensitization and engagement of parents. Here, getting into evidence sharing with parents, setting up or rather commissioning social pacts or agreements that they would pursue together to address issues that challenge or that impact negatively on learning, for instance, absenteeism. And then the 3rd one was implementation of the learning camps. And here is where now the real work happened at the school level for 1 hour per day for each of the subjects, so 2 hours a day for the remediation. And of course, scaling up through partnerships, other like-minded entities that replicated this for us to be able to demonstrate whether impact is similarly possible in other contexts. Next slide, please. So focusing more now on what did we find out? one of the things we had hypothesized at the beginning of the program, of the assumptions we had put across, was that if we run these camp interventions, then we are able to have 85% of the children at least improving by at least one competency level every 10 days. And this is in relation to what previous similar projects have demonstrated in other countries. And we're picking just 85% as a benchmark for Kenya, but also interested to find out whether this would apply in this context. And so based on the data that we have actually accumulated, especially for the 2021-2022 literacy cohort, we did analysis to establish what proportion of those children increased by at least a competency level. And what you're presenting here is a summary of this information. So what you find is that at least 76%, which is about 9 percentage points short of what we had in our assumptions, were able to improve by at least 10%, by at least one to a higher competency level within any given 10 days. So when you talk about one higher competency level, in literacy, what this would mean is that if a child possibly started the intervention before they could read a word, then by the end of the 10 days, they will have graduated to reading a sentence. And a child who was reading a sentence should eventually have graduated to reading a simple passage. So those are the incremental levels in literacy. And so for every child and for every cohort that we worked with, we were keen to find out what would be the margin of improvement when this project is delivered, or when this intervention is delivered with fidelity. Now we look at, we noted that there were differences in terms of the context of the various regions where this happened. And we realized greater gains in one of the, what we're calling Bungoma County, which was not an ASAL county. The other two were arid and semi-arid regions, but this particular one would be considered an urban poor county, but with relatively low foundational outcomes even nationally. So the increment here may be attributed to the fact that the bulk of the intervention, which was in Swahili, closely connect to the language they speak at home. And these are some of the enablers that we realize that when you're implementing such interventions, then the language factor, the language of the home, is a key factor in designing similar interventions. When we look at the lowest place where we had Tana River demonstrating about 67% of the children improving, this again is one of the contributing factors was language, because this intervention particularly happened in English, and English was not the language of the home, the immediate language of the home. Of course, there were many other factors, such as during the period of implementation, there were notable periods of drought. But that notwithstanding, I think the greatest, because we're only considering children who attained a certain threshold of the learning sessions and considered them for analysis. So we conclusively were able to have 79% across the three, demonstrating that indeed this approach could work in hastening, or rather in accelerating the acquisition of the foundational competencies. Next slide, please. So closely related to that was numeracy, and numeracy, again, we were focusing on the foundational, or rather the basic operations. And here we are talking about children who could not add, subtract, multiply, or divide. And for record purposes, these were operations that were numerical in nature. None of them had any word problems. They were not word problems, rather they were numerical problems. So given the implementation over the three counties, we again were interested in looking at what were the dynamics for these children. So the levels we were considering would potentially begin with a child who is at addition, and would aim to move that child to the next possible level, which would be subtraction, multiplication, and of course division. And then looking at that in light of what were we estimating, again, we had an estimate of 85% of children would be graduating to a higher level competency within 30 days. So what we observed again, we see the 3 counties playing out differently. Again, with the non-ASAL county recording the highest gains in terms of literacy outcomes for the children within any given 10 days at 81%. And again, much lower levels in Tana River, quite contextual. This county looks like it's slightly lagging behind the others, even in numeracy. But overall, 75% of the children moving by at least 1 level in any given days. But one of the things we found out, especially in numeracy, is that besides language, and that's why we exempted word problems from any consideration, we were keen to understand what exactly are the numeracy competencies that were a hindrance to effective achievement. And for us, place value stood out as the greatest challenge. Right from instruction, it was quite a problematic concept to deliver, but also in terms of conceptualization by the children. Moving on. So in the besides the 3 counties, we also were excited about what would this look like, because remember, this was a contextualization process and a proof of concept, so to speak, in terms of advocating for targeted instruction in mediating the low foundational outcomes. So here we highlight a number of organizations that have replicated such programs in different counties. And the last column gives us a margin of improvement for the children who are able to acquire proficiency or to achieve proficiency within 30 days. Again, varied, even though we have, for instance, the Luala being at 48% in terms of achievement. But we also note that in the other counties, we have slightly high margins of children. And given this is that within 30 days, then we are saying that children who went through the Greek intervention, for instance, 63% of them were able to achieve proficiency. And this is just to validate a case that targeted remediation sessions then could possibly be a consideration to have as we mainstream foundational learning outcomes in the various regions of the country. Moving on. And so what do we recommend? We highlight 4 things. One is the language of instruction policies. And I think this conversation has been there for such a long time, but now narrowing down to the issue of acquiring the right foundations for learning. Again, it plays out in a very strong way, and highlighted there are just some of the adjustments that were applied, for instance, using materials in local languages to help bridge the gap between the language of the home and the language of the school. In one of the contexts, for instance, we had to purely consider use of the mother tongue in the classroom, yet we were dealing with children who were in grade 3 to 5, but still who didn't even possess oral fluency in a language such as Swahili, which is the intermediate, the most immediate language after the language of the home. So, and again, deploying teachers who are familiar with the language of instruction, or rather the language of attachment, to allow spaces where children could express themselves and even engage during the sessions. So this language of instruction policies, I think, is one of the primary recommendations we would make, a consideration of how this can be applied as we consider overcoming the challenges we are witnessing on learning outcomes. And not only the implementation of those policies, but having very clear implementation guidelines on how, for instance, we could manage the transitions, or how teachers could manage transitions from L1 to L2 to L3, language 1, language 2, or language 3, as they figure, as they support these children to settle well in their learning. The second one is, again, emphasizing the place of remediation within mainstream curricula. And this is because
you could wrap up, please.
Yes, until just about 2 minutes. The place of remediation to complement the, alongside the regular curriculum, because this helps these children, as demonstrated from the figures and statistics shared previously, that within relatively short periods of time, if you apply targeted instruction, then we're able to have over 50% or 60% of the children catching up. Then the third is a capacity issue, which is geared towards the teacher education and looking at how we can bridge theory and practice amongst teachers during teacher training, but also through our in-servicing programs to ensure that teachers are adequately equipped to address or to overcome the challenges and the barriers they might encounter in the classroom. And lastly is, of course, a multi-stakeholder approach to accelerating or to supporting these children who are lagging behind to eventually catch up with their peers and be able to reap the best out of the education system. So I'll pause there and back to you, Joy.
Thank you, Virginia. And let me ask Hamidou to summarize in French in 1 minute.
Yeah, OK. Bon, pratiquement, en fait, l'étude consiste à promouvoir une collaboration entre différentes parties prenantes. C'est comment? Ouais. Yeah, I'll read it, but I'll try to use my memory and then yeah, donc entre différentes parties prenantes pour améliorer donc l'apprentissage des enfants qui sont en difficulté scolaire en termes donc, de littératie et de numéricie. Donc, l'idée, c'est d'avoir plusieurs interventions. Donc, les différentes parties prenantes peuvent prendre une partie donc, des interventions, comme elle l'a cité. Il y a un des modèles qui est utilisé, qui est l'enseignement au bon niveau, learning at the right level, teaching at the right level, donc l'enseignement dans ce sens, et qui permet, donc, toutes ces interventions, en fait, arrivent à améliorer l'apprentissage des enfants. Donc, c'est ce que l'étude a démontré. Donc, ils ont comparé, je crois, 3 régions du Kenya, où ils ont montré que cette activité conjointe de plusieurs types d'intervenants a fait avantage les enfants en fait, dans leur apprentissage de littératie et de numéricie. Donc, en fin de compte, ce qui est ressorti et qui est très important pour moi, c'est qu'ils se sont rendus compte que dans la région où les enfants ont moins appris, c'est là où il y a la langue de la maison et la langue de l'école, en fait, sont différentes. Donc, il y a toujours cette question de la langue d'instruction qui se pose parce que dans la plupart de nos écoles, il y a cette discontinuité entre la maison, l'apprentissage à la maison et l'apprentissage à l'école. Et c'est ce qui pose beaucoup de problèmes. Donc, ils ont donné quelques recommandations sur comment il faut continuer donc l'apprentissage des enfants, ce n'est pas seulement l'affaire de l'école, c'est l'affaire de toute une communauté et d'autres intervenants aussi. Donc, je crois que je vais m'arrêter là. That's just in French. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Hamidou. So thank you, Virginia, as well.
You have to pay me now.
Thank you. So yeah, it was really interesting to work with Virginia as she showed the nexus between assessment and learning outcomes, and also emphasizing on the need, on the role of the language of instruction in strengthening the foundation of learning. Indeed, it cannot be business as usual. We have to think of ways to improve the instructional process so that we can allow learners to catch up after prolonged school closures. So that brings us to the end of our presentations. We had one more presenter virtually, but he's unavailable at the moment. So I would like to thank all the participants for your patience, for sitting in these long hours and for listening in. And instead of, maybe I should just give you one chance. If there's anything burning, maybe you're inspired to say something after these 3 presentations. It doesn't have to be a question. Yes, just something, or it can be a question. Please feel free to go ahead.
Thank you, moderator, for the opportunity and all the brilliant presentations I've listened to. The presentation from Ethiopia University in partnership with Cambridge University, where there was an economic model demonstrating how to measure learning loss, given some historical data. I would like to, that's an interesting and I think a bit more groundbreaking in approach to be quantitative regarding the loss, which many have spoken to, and the speaking has been elusive in some way, but a lot of money has been lost. But in a way, you have done a quantification at a lower grade, K to 3. I wanted to ask, what are your assumptions, number 1, and number 2, is what are the limitations of the model and also the results, and whether this can be applied in a generalized manner, because many countries, maybe all countries, need to measure the loss, particularly in literacy, but also numeracy, and be guided. How can it be generalized to apply to all member states?
Thank you. Dr. Belai, are you able to respond in 30 seconds?
30 seconds, okay. Thank you very much. Actually, we use this econometric method to estimate learning loss, and that helped us to establish in concrete terms the magnitude of the loss, because people were talking about the loss, but what is the amount of that loss? So one best approach that we employed is to use this regression model, and we were controlling some factors, but other factors were not controlled. So we selectively identified few important factors like people characteristics, household characteristics, and the regions, but other factors might not be included in this model. Maybe that is the weakness of this model, because we cannot account for everything. So we selectively selected few factors, and we controlled the effect of those factors and estimated the magnitude of the loss. So this can be applied, I think, this can be replicated rather in other countries to see if there is any similarity.
If there would be funding, I would like to have that tested in Malawi, where I come from. So this is my submission. I think this is what GPE should be able to support in UNESCO. So welcome to Malawi and a few other countries. We want to train the model. Thank you.
That's the spirit of learning. So thank you so much. Let me wind up by thanking today's presenters, Dr. Belai, Shale, and Virginia, for your insightful discussions, and also for reminding us that we have a role. It's our collective effort as we continue using data and evidence to raise learning outcomes post COVID-19. So without much further ado, I would like to bring this session to close, and I wish you a good evening. Interpreter, over to you.